So the question is, what is personal ego and how does it affect one's life? Now, personal ego is the ego of a person, the ego of an individual, as compared to ego of a group or the ego of a nation or the ego of the humankind. Personal ego is the ego of a member of the species. So personal ego within the human species would be the ego of an individual. This individual could be a child or an adult. It could be a female or a male. So any person who is alive will have an ego, and we will call that personal ego. So personal ego varies from person to person, and it varies from childhood to adulthood, and we will see whether there is any development of ego as a child matures and becomes an adult. First of all, it is important to understand that ego does not exist if you think that the universe is organic and everything is fused and there is no separateness in it. So if you see the universe as a non-dualistic, organic universe in which everything is fused with everything else, then there is no ego. And so the concept of personal ego presupposes that the individual is separable from the universe, and ego is in fact the separateness of the individual. So when you say personal ego, you are saying that an individual is indeed separable from the universe, let alone from the species. Of course, he's separable from the universe, and he's also separable from the species. And so this separability, this ability to separate, actually has taken place, and the person is now indeed a separate being. So personal ego comes into existence when an individual is considered as a separate being, separable and separated from the species, from other objects in the universe. So personal ego, the realization of personal ego or the awareness of personal ego means that the person thinks that he or she is separate from the rest of the universe. He's separate from the human species, he's separate from the animals, he's separate from other forms of life, he's separate from other material things, and he's also separate from other immaterial and intangible things. So personal ego is not only separateness in the material world, it is also separateness in the non-material world. So there is a separation between the individual and God, for example. So personal ego cannot take place and cannot come into existence if the individual is not separable from God or from the Creator, and indeed has not been separated. So separability and separateness both must come into existence for ego to come into being. So personal ego is a realization of a person that the person is separate from the material world and is separate from the spiritual world and is separate from the non-material world and all other forms of life, including the human species, is separate from this individual. Now, when you say separate, that doesn't mean that there is no relationship between the person and the objects, the person and the other members of the human species. There is a relationship. In fact, there are multiple relationships that a person will have with the rest of the universe. But nevertheless, despite all these complex relationships, the person will continue to think that person is separable, is separate, and therefore he has a personal ego. Now, this personal ego in the physical form will mean that the person thinks that his human body is a separate being. And even though it is made out of matter and it develops, he eats food, he drinks, and there are a lot of material objects which are consumed in order to maintain this body, in order to develop this body. But nevertheless, the body itself is a separate being, and one body can be separated and is distinguishable from another body. Not only another human body, but also all other material objects are separable and separate from the human body. So the first realization is physical, that my body is different and separate and distinct, and it lives in its separate being from the rest of the world, even though it lives within the material world. But nevertheless, it is a unique human body. And therefore, this awareness that the body has a unique existence gives birth to physical ego. Now, it is very possible that this awareness of physical ego may actually develop within the womb of the mother, even though in the womb of the mother the fetus is in some ways totally dependent for its survival from the food it receives within the womb. But nevertheless, the fetus is a separate being, and to confuse this fetus with other organs of the human body will be a denial of the human ego of the fetus, or the physical ego of the fetus. And I think this is an important point, because the heart of a human body does not have an ego, and the liver or the lungs or any other body part of a human body does not have a separate ego. But a fetus within the human body does have a separate ego, not only the potential of a separate ego, but also indeed a physical separate ego at the moment this fetus is conceived, and a separateness and separability come into being. And therefore the claim that the fetus is part of the mother's body is, in my view, a mistaken view that denies the physical ego of the fetus who would eventually will be born and develop into a full-fledged human being. Now, physical ego or physical separateness in the form of a human body, we all know it's a common observation that the human body, from the moment of its separation from the mother's body, acquires a separate being about which there is very little disagreement. Once the baby is born, baby has a very distinct and separate physical ego. And this physical body begins to develop, and it grows in size, it grows in height, it develops in terms of its organs, its bone structure, and after a while it stabilizes, and the physical ego or the physical body begins to acquire a more stable shape or form. Even though human body is in constant process of transformation, and the human body never is the same. It keeps on changing, even when it has become relatively stable in terms of that there will be no more height increase or basically the height, because the size of the body can grow and shrink while the height of the body has relatively become stable. But we see that as the person grows older, the body then begins to change, and sometimes it declines in strength, and the organs which were becoming stronger begin to become weak. So the body almost follows a bell curve in terms of its growth and decline. But despite this bell curve existence and growth and decline of the human body, the separateness of the human body remains a fact. And so that's the first understanding of the personal ego, that personal ego indeed is the physical ego. And the physical ego means the separateness of the body, human body, from the rest of the material world, and also the non-material world. I think it's important to understand that the body is also separate from the non-material world. Now, here one point needs to be clarified. Now, we know that human body is a source of trillions of bacteria and other germs, maybe viruses also, maybe other bugs that we cannot name right now. So the human body does have other beings, and in that sense the physical ego is somewhat problematic, because the human body is not purely human, in the sense that there are other forms of life that live within the human body, and if each bacterium and if each virus is a unit and has its own personal ego, then we will see that the human body, in that sense, is not separate from other forms of life, and they live, these bacteria and viruses and other pathogens, and even good bacteria and good germs. They live within the human body, and so in that sense, the physical separateness of the human body is not absolute. It is relative. I think when we didn't know that we were the residents of so many bacteria and viruses, we could think of human purity, that human body is pure. But I think now we know that human body indeed has other forms of life within it. And in fact, human body may not be able to survive or become sick when good bacteria are absent within the human body to carry out the digestion of food and many other functions that perhaps we still don't know. So, but I think the concept of physical ego is perhaps more important within the human species, individual qua individual. I think when we compare one human individual with another human individual, then the concept of personal ego is more significant than in other situations when we compare a human body with other forms of life. We know that human body cannot be separated from other forms of life, and therefore personal ego is essentially the separateness of the physical body within the human species, that I am separate from the other members of the human species. Now, physical ego, I think if we go further, we find that ego not only means separateness and awareness of separateness, it could also mean certain feelings about this separateness and certain self-assessment of this separateness. For example, if you think that your physical body is very attractive or is very beautiful, then you're adding more definition to personal ego or physical ego, because now you're not only saying that your body is separate from other human bodies, but you're also claiming and perhaps believing, and in some cases asserting to others, that your body is superior to the bodies around you. Now, you may claim physical ego, the superiority of your physical ego, or the superiority within your physical ego may depend on the way your body is structured, or maybe the race of your body, the skin color of your body, the height of your body, the largesse of your body, the supportiveness of your body, the agility with which you move. So you could rely on many factors to argue to yourself and to others excuse me, that your physical body is superior to others. And by implication, you could also begin to feel that your physical body is inferior to other physical bodies around you. So we find that physical ego is not only simply a realization that your body is separate from other bodies, but it is also a sort of assertion, a claim that your body is superior to other bodies, or a feeling that your physical body is inferior to the bodies around you. So physical ego could be assertive, or it could be passive, it could be aggressive. It is assertive and aggressive when you openly claim that your physical body is indeed very attractive and very superior, and people should pay attention to it, and people should, admit that your body is superior to theirs. So there is all sorts of implications of this ego that you attach to your physical body. And as I said earlier, it could be both positive and negative. You could have, inferiority complex about your physical body, or you could have superiority feelings about your physical body. So physical ego, which is part of personal ego. Now personal ego is much bigger. And as I will explain later, that personal ego is physical ego, then it is also intellectual ego, and in some cases it is spiritual ego as well. But definitely these three, and there may be other forms of ego that construct the personal ego, but definitely the physical body and intellect and spirituality, these are the three main elements of personal ego. So just like you think that your physical body is separate and in some cases superior to other bodies, human bodies, or inferior to other human bodies. So there's a certain amount of awareness about your physical being. Similarly, there could be awareness about your intellect. Now, the intellectual ego is the awareness that your mind, that your intellect, that your intelligence, that your ability to do things smartly and intelligently is something that is part of your being, and that your mind has an existence just like your body has an existence. And just like your body is nourished by the things that you receive from the material world, similarly your mind is nourished and develops by the ideas and thoughts that you receive from the intellectual world. Now, human beings, they are very proud of the fact that in addition to being physical beings, they are intellectual beings, that they are intelligent beings, that they have certain amount of intellect, the ability to organize, the ability to create material objects, the ability to make comforts for the body, the developments that have taken place over the centuries, from housing to beautiful housing, and the modern world, is a reflection of human intelligence in many, many ways. That we have used our ability to work on the material world and to change the material world. If the weather is uncomfortable, we have found ways to make our bodies comfortable. Like maybe we can sit in warm houses or air-conditioned houses. We can go from one place to another. We have invented roads and transportations and aircrafts and ships in order to take our physical bodies from one place to another. So the development of mathematics, the development of science, the development of social sciences, these are all products of human intellect, and the individual contributions have been tremendous. So I think in the intellectual world, you may have an intellectual ego, in the sense that you might think that your mind is a residence of intellect, and you are an intelligent being who not only understands how the universe works or how the human species functions, but also you might be an author, you might be a writer, you might be a scientist, you might be an inventor. You might have used your mind not only to solve the day-to-day problems, but also it's possible that you might have contributed to the human intellect by either synthesizing new ideas or offering new ideas. So intellectual ego comes into being when you think that your mind is separate. Again, it is related, but it's separate. It has its own existence, and is separable and separate from other minds of the human species. Now, just like physical ego, your intellectual ego may have superiority feelings about it, or may have inferiority feelings about it. If you think that you're smarter than others, if you think you're more intelligent than others, if you think that your intellectual products are superior to the intellectual products of others, then your intellectual ego is going to have some feelings of superiority. But if you think that you're not educated, you're not literate, or even though you're literate and educated, your intellectual contributions are minor or non-existent, in that case you might begin to develop sort of an inferior intellectual ego. So we find that ego, whether it is physical or intellectual, it has certain feelings about itself, and sometimes the feelings are intensely inferior, and sometimes the feelings are intensely those of superiority, and accordingly you construct relationships with with other members of the human species, particularly the ones who come into touch with you. Now, uh, we know that there are all kinds of variations possible in asserting your intellectual ego. Uh, you could assert it in a way that it turns off other people. Other people, even though they admire that you have some superior intellectual abilities, but the way you assert them, you turn them off. They don't like it. So you create sort of negative feelings among those against whom or among whom you assert your intellectual ego. And similarly, it's very possible that you think that your intellectual ego is very inferior, and the people may have sympathy for you, may have some sort of good feelings for you. So the reaction to your intellectual ego could be as complex as it is to your physical ego. Because even though you think you have a beautiful physical body, not everybody is going to feel that way. Of course, some physical bodies are universally liked, and some physical bodies are universally considered, less attractive. But an average human body attracts some and doesn't attract others. So similarly, an average intellectual ego is it neither is going to be overly assertive, nor it is going to be overly non-assertive, and what we call normal. I mean, normal is what frequently happens. So, personal ego has both physical ego and has intellectual ego. Now, in some cases, the personal ego may have spiritual ego. And spiritual ego means that you are aware of your spiritual being. Now, this is a tough topic because we are relatively familiar with the intellectual ego, and physical ego is the most obvious. But in the case of spiritual ego, it becomes problematic to understand it, because at one level, spiritual ego seems like a thought process, and it is very difficult for some people to separate the spirit from the mind, and therefore the separateness of spirituality from the thought process is difficult. And some people deny that there is any such thing as spirit. It's simply a concoction of intellect. It is something that the mind invented, and there is no separate existence of the spirit. But on the other hand, many religions and even other philosophies believe that in addition to our physical and mental dimensions, we have a spiritual dimension. And of course, the prophets and holy people they definitely claim to have a spiritual ego. And the spiritual ego probably means that you have special knowledge of the non-material world. And I think this is an important definition of spirituality, that spirituality is the understanding or the knowledge of the non-material and non-intellectual world. So there is a universe, part of the universe, which is neither physical nor intellectual, and neither body nor our intelligence can reach it. And there is a very special type of consciousness that you need in order to access the spiritual world. And that is within the reach of every human being, but not every human being tries to reach it. And therefore, over the centuries, the appeal or the attraction to the spiritual world has been problematic and uncertain, even though most human beings search for an understanding of the non-material world. And I think the concept of God is the most important concept in the spiritual world, and God's concept, which is very intrinsic to human spirituality, is an effort to understand the parts of the universe which are neither physical nor intellectual. So we find that some people who claim to be holy people, they have a spiritual ego, and they feel that they are separate from the rest of the human species, and mostly they have very positive feelings about themselves. I think the most clear example of spiritual ego is the ego of a prophet. A prophet feels that God has special relationship with the prophet, and has chosen the prophet to lead the human species and to disclose the secrets of spirituality to the human species. And therefore, not every member of the human species can be a prophet. In fact, every human being has a physical body, and every human being has some intellectual ego, even though it varies in quality and content. But spiritual ego, I would say, is very unevenly distributed. Very, very few people develop a very strong awareness of spiritual ego. And that's why the number of prophets, particularly the ones who have following, are very few. So Jesus, for example, is a prophet who claimed to be very close to God. And a lot of his followers believe that he's so close to God that he's God's son. And so spiritual ego means that you have some special knowledge of spirituality, and you understand the secrets of the universe that are non-material, and that ordinary human beings cannot access. Um, now, below the prophets, of course, there are holy people. Um, for example, in the Christian church, we do have, in the Catholic church, we have, hierarchy of persons who are holy. And similarly, in Hinduism, we have swamis and yogis who cultivate spirituality and try to reach the spiritual world. Similarly, Buddhist monks, they are not prophets, but they explore through meditation the spiritual world and the spirituality of the cosmos and of the universe. In almost every religion, there are people who are predominantly, for most of their lives, devoted to understanding and sometimes communicating spirituality to others. Understanding for themselves and then communicating that understanding to others. Now, spiritual ego is, in most cases, the spiritual ego is positive, and I'm not sure if a person who has developed a spiritual ego is going to be overly, assertive about it. He could be assertive about it, and that's why a lot of prophets they were not well received, and some were tortured, some were killed, some were banished from their towns. Most were considered insane, and despite these, negative responses from the contemporaries, prophets survive, and they begin to gather following in the succeeding generations. So, Prophet Muhammad of Islam, for example, was persecuted in his life. He was expelled from the city where he was born. And now, there are millions and millions of people far away from where the Prophet was born who very strongly and firmly believe in his message and in his prophecy. Even though there are still a lot of critics of Prophet Muhammad. So, spiritual ego, I would say, is not available to every member of the human species. At least not in a way that it is available to the prophets and holy men. So you would say that every human being has a physical body and maybe a physical ego. And most human beings have intellectual ego. And very few human beings have spiritual ego. Now, please understand that the word ego can be used in two different meanings. One meaning is that ego means separateness, that you are separate from others, that you have a very distinct being which should not be confused with other beings. And the other meaning of ego, which is popular meaning, and that is that you think very highly of yourself. I think the second meaning is more problematic in the sense that it confuses the concept of ego, which is very important to understand deep philosophical issues. Because without physical ego and without mental ego, Uh, and with our spiritual ego, um, a sense of the self remains incomplete. And it seems to me that uh, there is this trend in some spiritual circles to deny that separateness of the individual, which, in my view, does not capture the reality of human existence. Of course, human beings are connected not only to each other but to the material world. Human species cannot exist without the material world, without food, without water, without air, without light, without darkness. All these things make human species possible. And the survivability of the human species is 100% dependent on the material world. But that doesn't mean that we should forget about or underestimate or ignore the concept of personal ego. Because personal ego, that each human being is distinct, is a great contribution to the human civilization. For centuries, the personal ego of each and every member of the human species was not recognized, and therefore some of the rights which we now extend to each and every individual were not available to most human beings because they were not considered as separate and respectable individuals or separate beings. So I believe that personal ego, in the philosophical sense, that each human being is separate, that each human body is separate, that each human mind has its own distinct existence, and that each human being has access to spirituality. These are great ideas which protect to some extent what we call individualism. Because individualism means that you respect the dignity of the body, and give protection to it. And that's why the torture of the physical body or maltreatment of the physical body, cruel punishments against physical body, and similarly cruel punishments against the intellectual ego and your spiritual ego, they are no longer accepted. So this idea that you should be secure in your physical body and in your mental integrity and in your spiritual freedom, these ideas are intimately related to the concept of personal ego. And if we don't respect personal ego of each and every member of the human species, we are unlikely to treat them well. And I think that is a great achievement of human civilization, that each and every member of the human species is considered separate and is considered dignified and is considered respectable, and each human body has a right to develop in security, and each human mind has the right to preserve itself, and each human spirit has the right to search itself in freedom. And I think, therefore, at the end of the day, personal ego, the concept of personal ego, is a remarkable and worth preserving notion of human civilization.